Nostradamus Century 7, Quatrain 26 presents a chilling warning. Foists and galleys around 7 ships, a mortal war will be let loose. The leader from Madrid will receive a wound from arrows, 2 escaped, and 5 brought to land. Let's picture the scene. A dark, stormy sea. The skies are brooding, and a fleet of ships stands assembled, each one poised, waiting for a moment that could shift the tides of history. 7 ships, surrounded by smaller, faster vessels, each one prepared for battle. In this scene, a conflict is brewing that seems both foreordained and imminent. This is the vision Nostradamus painted for us in this famous quatrain. A vision not just of battle, but of forces that go beyond the physical realm. Written nearly 5 centuries ago, his words continue to resonate, not because they predict events, but because they reveal something about how humanity works. Nostradamus gives us more than a prophecy. He offers us insight into the patterns that govern conflict, unity, and division. As we explore this vision, I want you to consider it not just as a distant or fantastical event, but as a metaphor for what happens in our lives and in our world. What might this scene reveal about how we navigate through times of tension, about the balance of forces in any group, or the costs of division? In this scene, Nostradamus presents us with 3 distinct triads, 3 sets of interrelated forces. Today, we're going to examine each of these, uncovering the lessons they contain, lessons as vital now as they were in his time. In the first line of the quatrain, Nostradamus introduces us to 3 types of ships: foists, galleys, and 7 ships. Each ship type, each vessel carries its own strengths and purposes. The foists, small and agile, are built for speed. They are the messengers, the scouts, adaptable and quick to move. Then we have the galleys, solid and strong, the muscle of the fleet, able to withstand the harshest attacks. And finally, the 7 central ships, the heart of the fleet, representing both unity and power. These 3 forces, small, swift foists, robust galleys, and the 7 ships at the center, create a balanced, interdependent system. Nostradamus shows us a coordinated network, where each vessel type enhances the others. But this isn't just a fleet, it's a triad of complementary elements working in harmony. And this idea of harmony is where we find our first pattern, one that Nostradamus urges us to see, a pattern of mutual support and strategic unity. In this triad, we see what I'd like to call the harmonic pattern. In any group, each element has its role, and each depends on the other to complete the system. In a harmonic structure, if one part is missing, the balance is disrupted and the whole is weakened. Think of a team, an organization, even a family. Every member has a unique role, a piece of the whole, and it's in their interaction that real strength is found. The harmonic pattern, as Nostradamus describes it, shows us that these different types of vessels don't just coexist, they enhance each other's strengths. In battle, the smaller foists might navigate quickly, offering reconnaissance. The galleys could shield the 7 ships from direct hits, and the 7 ships representing the core stand ready to lead. Their effectiveness is only as strong as their cooperation. Here, Nostradamus highlights something essential about the nature of strength and unity. He shows us that an effective force doesn't require uniformity, but harmony. It's not about all the ships being the same. It's about each ship type offering something unique, a necessary role in the greater strategy. Consider this pattern applied to your own world. In a project, in a company, or in any group endeavor, we often find ourselves seeking people with different skills. Those who bring agility and speed, those who bring endurance, and those who stand as leaders. Nostradamus understood that strength lies in leveraging these differences, in allowing each component to complement the others. And it's only through this unity and diversity that the fleet, whether it's a group of ships or a group of people, achieves its true potential. So why does Nostradamus emphasize this coordinated balance? Because he knew that such harmony is fragile. It requires constant attention and respect for each part's role. When unity is intact, the fleet is strong. But in conflict, when that balance is disturbed, the strength of this harmony can unravel just as swiftly. Now that we've seen how Nostradamus paints a picture of unity and diversity among these maritime forces, he takes us one step further into the heart of conflict itself. He introduces a second triad that moves us through the inevitable stages of battle: encirclement, outbreak of war, and aftermath. Think of this next triad as a sequence that unfolds in 3 acts. First, there is encirclement. The tension builds as one side surrounds the other, a moment of suspense where both sides feel the pressure mounting. Then this tension finally snaps, giving way to an outbreak of war where the pent-up energy erupts into action. And lastly, there is the aftermath, a stage where everything settles but nothing is left as it was. Nostradamus shows us here the pattern of inevitability, the path that conflicts often follow when escalation begins. We see here what I call the causal pattern. The causal pattern is a chain of events, where one state triggers the next. Encirclement leads to confrontation, and confrontation leads to consequences. In this triad, Nostradamus reminds us that once this cycle of tension begins, it is challenging, sometimes impossible, to reverse. The causal pattern is more than just a roadmap of war. It's a universal lesson on escalation. In our lives, how many times have we felt tension build in a difficult relationship or situation? And if left unchecked, doesn't that tension often spill over into conflict? And once that conflict erupts, we reach a stage where, no matter the outcome, things can't go back to the way they were. Nostradamus is highlighting a hard truth. Once a conflict escalates, each stage propels us forward. The more we allow tension to grow, the more difficult it becomes to find peace or reconciliation without enduring a period of consequence. This cycle is common not just in battles, but in boardrooms, classrooms, and even friendships. But why would Nostradamus choose to emphasize this? Perhaps because he understood the power of foresight. When we recognize the signs of encirclement, the moments where tension begins to build, we're given a chance to intervene before escalation becomes inevitable. This causal pattern urges us to think about conflict in a different way, as a process that is easier to prevent than to reverse. Nostradamus is saying, understand the cycle, recognize it in your own life, and break it before it reaches the point of no return. It's a timeless reminder that the most effective way to manage conflict is often to prevent it from reaching a critical point. From unity to conflict, we've now followed Nostradamus's vision to its final stage, the aftermath. And here he introduces his last triad, a triad of numbers that tells us as much about human nature as it does about war. 7, 2, and 5. These numbers are more than symbols. They reflect the way conflict inevitably divides. In the Quatrain, Nostradamus describes how, after the conflict, 2 ships manage to escape, while 5 are brought to land. Once a single united fleet, this group is now fragmented, split into those who survive and those who don't. This division isn't merely a consequence. It's a pattern we see repeated in life. It's the divergent pattern. The divergent pattern represents a splitting, a fragmentation of unity into separate paths. Think of it as starting with a cohesive whole, 7 ships, and ending with parts that go their separate ways. In this pattern, Nostradamus reflects the reality that conflict often results in a lasting division. After the storm of war, the fleet is no longer one unit. It's forever marked by separation. The divergent pattern teaches us something fundamental. Once unity is lost, re-establishing it can be nearly impossible. Even when some part survives, like the 2 ships that escape, the whole is altered. The bonds that once held the fleet together have been permanently severed. This is true not only on a battlefield, but in our relationships and communities as well. When we let conflict reach a point of division, it's rare that we can fully restore what was there before. Nostradamus seems to be saying that unity, once fractured, leaves scars that shape the future of the group. And so, the cost of division is often far greater than the cost of reconciliation. So how can we apply this? Nostradamus isn't just cautioning against conflict. He's urging us to consider the long-term impacts of our actions. The divergent pattern asks us to reflect on how every division we allow to deepen in our relationships, every bridge we let burn in anger or misunderstanding, carries consequences. After conflict, it's rare to return to the exact state of unity we once had. But knowing this gives us a chance to pause, to weigh our decisions carefully before allowing division to take hold. In Nostradamus's view, the outcome of any division isn't just about who survives, it's about how unity itself is altered. And this realization encourages us to consider what we're willing to preserve and what we're prepared to let go of in the face of conflict. So, what does all of this mean? As we've explored these three patterns, harmonic, causal, and divergent, we've seen how Nostradamus's vision isn't just a cryptic tale of ships and battles. It's a profound exploration of human nature. Together, these patterns form a powerful commentary on the life cycle of unity and the fragile balance that holds us together. In the harmonic pattern, Nostradamus shows us that unity draws strength from diversity. Like the varied ships in the fleet, each of us brings something unique to the groups we're a part of. Yet while diversity within unity creates resilience, it's also fragile. Just as a fleet must work together to achieve balance, so must any group, whether it's a team at work, a family, or an entire society. But this balance is easily disrupted, and Nostradamus's harmonic vision reminds us to nurture and protect it if we want to stay strong. Through the causal pattern, we see that conflict follows a trajectory that is often all too familiar. It begins with mounting tension, encirclement, and when that pressure is ignored, it spills over into confrontation, inevitably leading to aftermath and consequence. Nostradamus invites us to recognize these stages and to see escalation as a warning rather than a foregone conclusion. This pattern speaks to our need for vigilance, reminding us that conflict is much easier to manage when addressed early before it spirals out of control. Finally, the divergent pattern shows us that the aftermath of conflict often results in irreversible division. Once unity is shattered, restoring it to its original state can be nearly impossible. When Nostradamus describes the fleet as split into survivors and captives, he's not only talking about the immediate consequences of battle, but also the deep, lasting divisions it creates. This is a reminder that, whether in friendships, families, or entire nations, division leaves scars that shape our future paths in ways we can't always anticipate. Taken together, these patterns tell a story of unity that can either be maintained or fragmented, depending on how we respond to tension. Nostradamus is urging us to recognize that we each play a role in either preserving unity or allowing division to take root. In any situation, whether in small groups or on a global scale, understanding these patterns allows us to make choices that preserve harmony rather than disrupt it. So how can we use this insight? Nostradamus's patterns serve as a lens for examining the tensions we encounter every day, from small misunderstandings to large-scale disputes. When we're mindful of these patterns, we gain the ability to see the stages of tension and potential conflict more clearly, allowing us to intervene before division becomes inevitable. We are reminded that while unity requires effort, division brings a lasting cost. Ultimately, Nostradamus's Quatrain is more than a prophecy. It's a call to action. He shows us that the true power of any group lies in its ability to remain harmonized, to recognize escalation before it divides us, and to choose unity over fragmentation wherever possible. And in this way, Nostradamus's vision becomes a mirror, challenging us to consider what we're willing to protect, what we're willing to risk, and what we're willing to lose. As we stand here, centuries after Nostradamus penned this quatrain, the patterns he outlined have never been more relevant. Today we live in a world that constantly tests our unity, where conflict escalates quickly and where divisions once formed seem harder than ever to heal. Nostradamus's vision was not just a prophecy. It was a guide to understanding and perhaps even preventing the cycles of conflict and fragmentation that we see around us every day. Consider our society today. We see ideological, political, and cultural divisions that seem only to grow deeper. Just as the 7 ships were fractured by conflict, we are at risk of letting these divisions tear at the fabric of our communities. The harmonic pattern reminds us that our strength lies in unity, drawing power from our differences rather than letting them divide us. If we want to avoid the divergent pattern Nostradamus warned of, we need to take intentional steps toward bridging these divides. Seeking to understand rather than entrench ourselves. We need to prioritize connection over conflict and cooperation over isolation. Globally, we face escalating tensions between nations over resources, territory, ideologies, and power. Just as Nostradamus described a sequence from encirclement to war to aftermath, these tensions, if ignored, can lead to catastrophic outcomes. The causal pattern shows us the urgency of addressing these issues before they become irreversible. Whether it's a disagreement between two people or two nations, the lesson is the same. We need to recognize the early signs of escalation and take action to prevent it. Peace is not passive, it's an active choice, requiring intentional diplomacy, dialogue, and a willingness to find common ground before conflict spirals out of control. And perhaps one of our greatest challenges is environmental, a crisis that affects every one of us and requires a unified global response. But instead of collective action, we're often divided by short-term interests and blame. Nostradamus's harmonic pattern shows us that a unified approach, one that values each nation's unique contributions and circumstances, is essential. To address climate change, we need the cooperation of every ship in the fleet, each bringing its strengths to the table to achieve a balance. It's only by working together that we can face this challenge, and it's only through harmony that we can create solutions with lasting impact. Nostradamus's message resonates because it challenges us to examine the costs of letting unity slip away, the risks of allowing conflicts to escalate unchecked, and the lasting scars of division. But his vision also reminds us that we have a choice. We can recognize these patterns, see where they're unfolding in our world, and act to change the outcomes. Nostradamus doesn't just warn us about the dangers of conflict, he urges us to take responsibility for preventing it. In every moment we face a decision. We can let our differences separate us, or we can see them as pieces of a larger whole, a balance that makes us stronger. We can choose to intervene when we see tensions rising, knowing that we hold the power to prevent escalation. And we can prioritize unity, even when it's difficult, understanding that once it's lost, it's one of the hardest things to regain. As we leave here today, let's take with us not just Nostradamus's warnings, but his lessons on harmony, escalation, and unity. Because the future of our communities, our nations, and our planet depends on our ability to learn from these patterns and to choose a path of unity over division, of peace over conflict. Nostradamus's vision can be a prophecy of hope, a future where we use our wisdom to break cycles of conflict, to prevent division, and to work together toward a world that reflects the best of what humanity can be.